Okay, so carrying forward. So in the last lesson we covered the flow of events. So we worked on the timing of events, how long things are presented, when they're presented, how do we repeat them. So we were able to basically construct the basic elements. We constructed a whole fully functional trial with the presentation of all our stimuli, the recording of response, and the looping of trials. We did 3 trials, but of course we could loop it for 40 trials if we wanted to, just by modifying one line in our script. So we're pretty advanced already in terms of where we are in having a fully functioning version of the experiment. Now, one thing we have to work on, however, now is response collection. So, one thing we definitely want, one ingredient that we want to focus on is how do we grab responses from the participant. Now, remember that the participant doesn't just have to press a key press to advance the experiment, which is currently what we've been using key presses for. We have to use the key press not only to advance to the next trial, but also to know what the participant's perception of the stimulus was. So if you remember, in our experiment, we're presenting this upward gaze stimulus for a variable amount of time, and at the end of the trial we're going to be asking one or two questions to the participant, which is, was this period of time too short or too long with respect to what feels just right? Okay, so we're going to need 2 keys. Let's say that we want key A, meaning it's too short, and key L, meaning it's too long. We're going to be using those 2 keys, but we want to make sure, for example, that it's only those 2 keys that are allowed. So if the subject, for example, by mistake presses some other key like P or whatever, something that's neighboring, for example, L, we won't accept that as a response, until they respond either A or L, because if we don't limit the possibilities of what keys are pressed, we might then find ourselves in a situation of where we're not able to really tell if the person actually pressed the wrong button, did they want to press L but they just misplaced their finger, or did they completely, their hand just slipped on the keyboard and they didn't really even look at the stimulus. So we have to make sure that they responded one of those 2 keys. We might allow even a 3rd key, which is, for example, the escape key, just in case we want to be able to exit our script, because, for example, if we're debugging the script, we might want to be able to control when to exit. We might not tell the subject about the escape key, but if, for example, we want to show, if we just want to run 3 trials out of 40, and just to see if everything's working, we might as well just include a button to make sure we can escape whenever we want to. So, response collection. So we've already been working with responses. So let me go to the corresponding page over here, because we have been, reading the keyboard as usual. As I said before, we've been doing it only to control, the flow of events. We have been using a function which is keyboard weight, and keyboard weight actually has more functionality than what we've been just, using it for. So. As usual, as it comes as for the previous examples, for this section here, also there's a script that's already written, which is keypress_test.m. So that's going to contain all the things that actually we're going to be discussing right now. But as usual, I sort of invite you to sort of let's actually write this together, so you get a more hands-on feel of how we're understanding how these things actually work, one step at a time. So let's go here. So here's the key press test, just to show you that we're going to be actually covering all these steps over here. Let's start off with keyboard weight. Let's only look it up, and let's open also a new document in our editor, so we're going to be able to start writing in here when we want to. So I'm going to look up the help for this. As usual, a lot of text, but generally you get the basic feel for what it's about in just a few lines in the top. So we see that this is the function. This is the syntax, of course, of the function. It's called keyboard weight. It has some inputs. And you can tell that these inputs are optional. They're all optional. And we know that it's optional because every time we used keyboard weight, notice that we never provided any inputs. Okay, but you can provide inputs, if you want to. And it spits out some outputs. Now the output seconds, key code, delta seconds. Let's see what's going on here. So it says keyboard wait. Waits until any key is down. Okay, so that we know that because that's exactly what we've been using it for. And optionally returns the time in seconds. So that's what seconds stands for. And the key code vector of keyboard states. So that's kind of, what does that mean? Well, this is basically just saying that it outputs a vector. So we know that a vector, remember that we talked about vectors when we sort of created a variable like this. That's a vector, okay? Because if it had been just this, that's a scalar. This is a vector. So it outputs a vector of keyboard states. So let's try and run this and understand what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in the command window for the moment. Or actually, let me do this in the script. So I'm just going to write keyboard wait. Okay, and I'm going to store an output. So one is the seconds. Okay, fine. And the other one was a key code vector. So I'm just going to write keys. Let's just write keys. Okay. I'm going to put semicolon because I want to be able to inspect these variables on my own, not having the command window necessarily spit it out. Okay, so I'm just gonna run this. So I'm gonna first of all save it. So let's start saving this as. Okay, we can call this, just for consistency, we can call it test keyboard. Okay. So let's run this. Okay, so I know that something's happening over here. It's waiting, it's busy because it's waiting for me to do something in the command window with the keyboard. So I'm just going to press some button. I'm going to press some key. I'm going to press, for example, A, button A. Okay, so I pressed button A, and all of a sudden I see my prompt back over here, and I see no longer that the thing is busy. So I'm going to check my workspace to see what variables are in there. And what I'm interested in is, so I have seconds and keys. These are the two outputs that I produce. So seconds, I can see a number over here. Okay, so if I double click, I can actually open it in a number editor. So this is basically the time at which I press the button after I started running the experiment. So you can imagine that seconds can be useful because, for example, there's times that you're running an experiment and you're interested, for example, in when the participant pressed the button. For example, to understand the reaction time, for example, of a participant in a speeded response task where you're presenting a stimulus and you want to know how fast a subject can process that stimulus. You would be interested in getting this number. The other variable is keys. Okay, so the other variable that we have is keys. Okay, so let's look for keys. So keys is over here, and I already know that it's a vector, and I already know that it's 256 elements. Let me actually open it so I can actually see it. So I'm going to double click on keys, and it should open in an editor. And what I see is a long string of long series of zeros. Actually, there's 256 of them. So if I actually scroll, I can see this all 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So what is this? Well, this technically is the state of every key on my keyboard. Now, it looks like they're all zeros, but in reality, one of them is not a zero. Let's just see if we can spot which one. Oh, here it is, 65. As you can see, number 65 is 1. It's only number 65. So basically what it's telling me is when keyboard is waiting, when this function is running, the program stops at this line over here, and it keeps on waiting until I press a keyboard. As soon as I press a key on my keyboard, it outputs this vector, and it tells me which key was pressed, and it happens to be the one that is 1, which is key number 65. Now, number 65 is actually is the A key, is the one that I pressed. All right, let's try again, and let's press the L key. So I'm going to run this again. So I'm just going to go here to run. Okay, Okay, so it's running. I know that it's running because MATLAB is busy, so I'm going to go to the command window, and I'm going to type in, this time, I'm going to type L, because that's the other key I'm interested in. Okay, so I pressed L. Okay, so let's check out. Now, 65, as you can see now, is empty, is 0. Let's see if, here's the one, 76. So basically what we know, so I'm gonna start writing this down. I'm gonna say, like, A corresponds to, what was it, 60, was it 61? 65? 65, right? 65, and L to 76 in keys. Okay, so let me just double check that. So A 65, yeah. Okay. Okay, so obviously when we run this, we don't want to, if we're running this keyboard await function and we get this variable, we're not going to manually inspect and try to figure out where what key was pressed just by inspecting this vector. What we're going to do is we're going to use a MATLAB function which is just called find. Find basically just works like this. You just type find, and you just plug in a vector which is made out of many zeros and one and more than one eventually. Basically what it tells you is just in what instances is keys 1. Where is it that ones appear within keys? That's the best way of phrasing it. Okay, so if I press this, it tells me 65, so it's telling me that in keys there is a 1 occurring at location number 65, right over here. Now if this value also were 1, so I'm just going to set this to 1, okay, and I just do find keys again, it's going to give me 2 locations, 65 and 70. So we saw that with find, the find function, I'm able to find whatever keys were pressed. So remember that since we're interested in only 2 key presses, or potentially 3 because we might have A, L, and escape key, we want to make sure that one of those keys was pressed. So obviously we have to be able to inspect what key was pressed to check, whether either A was pressed or L was pressed, or if something else was pressed. So the first thing is, let's actually get the key that was pressed. So I'm just going to write get that key that was pressed. That was pressed. Okay. So I'm going to call this variable. So I'm going to use the find function, but I'm going to store the result in a variable. So I'm going to call this variable key. So I call this one keys because this is a vector and it's all the keys, right, that are on the keyboard. Here I'm actually pressing, I'm actually just requesting for the one that was pressed, and I'm going to call it key. So I'm going to write find, and I'm going to write keys in here. So I'm just going to copy it here. Okay, here I'm going to add the semicolon because in the context of a program, I'm not really interested in this being spat out. Okay, so let's try to think of this. So basically, in the context of our trial, right? So let's go to test flow. Just so let's see. Okay, so basically here you're presenting the stimuli, stimulus 1, stimulus 2, stimulus 3. Okay, here you're waiting for a response. So this is kind of like where technically you would start plugging in things, logic that is related to, checking for the keys, making sure that the correct key was pressed, logging it, storing it, whatever. So basically, we can sort of imagine that at some stage here we would have some type of logic that would be, checking what key was pressed and making sure that it is an accepted key. It's a valid key for that trial. One way to check things in an experiment in MATLAB basically is to run some sort of little test where you're sort of saying. We might have, like, for example, 2 options, for example, where something has been pressed and it is correct, or something else has been pressed and we do not want that response. We can use some way of controlling that by using something that is called an if statement. So basically, if statements works like this. I'm going to start just writing down this in here just so you can see. You generally have something like if this happened. So this is not actual code. This is I'm just writing it in English. If this happened, okay, do this, okay. And I could just end the statement over here. So basically, this would mean that when we reach an if statement, the if statement checks if something has happened, okay? It might be anything. It might be that a number has a certain value, or it might be, in our case, that a certain key has been pressed. You would do this. You would do something. I don't know. You would like display something on the screen, or you would log some data, for example. Period. Then that would finish. So basically, this statement here, the things that happen here, would only occur if this statement here has happened, which actually means it is true. It is a true statement. I can get a little bit more sophisticated with this. For example, I might add an else condition to this. Okay. So basically, it would mean if something has happened up here, if this which has happened is true, do this, or else do something else. Do something else. Okay. So this is actually something that we can use to start, like for example, controlling what keys have been pressed and what to do as a consequence of that. So let's use this as a template. So basically, what we could ask him, for example, is to display on the screen, just so we can test this, what key was pressed. So basically, based on what is the actual value of key. So for example, what I could do here is I could say if key is equal to. So notice that I put a double equal sign. So basically, this is the difference. So when I'm doing just with it, when I just have an equal sign. So if I just have, for example, a is equal to 1, it's an assignment. Okay, I'm just telling him create a variable called a and assign to it a variable a value of 1. When I'm doing a double equals, I'm asking a question of the type, is a equal to something? So for example, is a equal to 1? If I ask this question, the response is true, because a is equal to 1. So I'm asking, is a equal to 1? And the answer is 1. Now, this answer here is a response of the type of the nature true or false. 1 is true, 0 is false. If I ask is a equal to 2, I'm going to get answer is equal to 0 because it's false. A is not equal to 2 because we know that a is 1. Okay, so here I'm asking if key is equal to, and I'm going to plug in a number here. I'm going to plug in number 65. Remember that we already saw that 65 corresponds to key A. Okay, so if key is equal to, and we found key here, remember. Okay, so if key is equal to 65, then let's do something. For example, let's write on the command window what the key name is. So I'm gonna do that. Now, in order to write to the command window from within a script, you write display, and in parentheses what you want to display. Now we're going to display some text, so remember that a string is encapsulated in single quote. Okay, and I'm going to write you pressed key A. Okay. Actually, yeah, I can't use single quotes because they're going to interfere with this one, so I'm going to use maybe double quotes like that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, okay, I could press if I press the A button, it corresponds to key number 65, and in here, it's going to notice that key is 65, and it is equal to 65 indeed. So when I'm asking, is key equal to 65, we'll say yes if I press A. And it's going to display this on the screen. Or else, if I press anything else, let's display, so I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to write, you pressed something else. Okay? So I can run this. I'm going to save this and I'm going to run this. So it's waiting for a keyboard. Now I know this because in the command window it's there's no prompt and it says busy, so it's waiting for something. It's waiting for me to press something. So I'm going to press A. And it says you pressed the key A. Alright, let me try running this again. Let me press something else just so I can see if this is true. I'm going to press whatever. I'm going to press P. It says you pressed something else. Okay, so that's pretty good. We're getting somewhere with this. So let's, however, consider that we're not just interested. So we're grabbing what key was pressed, but we want to check whether it's 65. But we were also interested in whether it could, we also allow it to be 76. So what we can do is there's another option, which is to write else if. So basically, what we're doing here is we're adding another else statement, but it's an else if. So basically it's saying else if and another condition. So if something else happens, so let's say what this something else is. Let's say else if key is equal to, what is it, 76. Do something else, which we could, for example, display that the key that was pressed was actually the L key. Okay, so what's the difference between else if and else? So basically, here what we're doing is that we're evaluating a statement. Is key equal to 65? If it's true, we run whatever follows it. Here, we're also evaluating a statement because we're saying, okay, so let's assume that this is not true, that the key was not 65. We're saying, okay, so we're in an else condition, but is it 76? Okay, so if it's 76, do this. Else by itself, instead, there's no statement that's being evaluated. It's just saying if neither of whatever follows what precedes it is true, then just do something else. Meaning, if neither of these are true, then if any other key was pressed, then you can run some other instruction. So the bottom line is that here there is no statement that's being evaluated. It's just saying if anything else, if any other thing happened, then just perform this operation here, which in this case is just display this line of text here. So let's try running this. I'm going to type A, and it says you pressed A. I'm going to try pressing L just to see that that's working. You pressed L. And finally, I'm going to run it again, and I'm going to press spacebar, for example. And it just says you press something else. So it's not telling me you press spacebar because I didn't actually include a spacebar condition, which would have been another else if statement checking for the corresponding number of the spacebar. I just said if it's not A and it's not L, then it has to be something else. And therefore just display you press something that is not A or L. Now the reason why we're doing this, the reason why we're setting this up is because we imagine that at some point in our experiment, in our trial, we want to constrain the response that the subject can produce to one of 2 or 3 keys, whatever. We could also include the escape key at some point, but for the moment, let's just keep it simple. Now, the problem, however, so we know that we can use an if-else statement to sort of check what was actually pressed and do something accordingly. For example, we might log the response. So for example, if we're in a trial, we reach the point where the subject has to respond, and we, for example, determine that if key 65 was pressed, we can log, for example, what they meant by that. For example, we can log that the subject meant the stimulus was too short. Or we could log, if the other button was pressed, that the stimulus was too long. So the problem, however, with this is that if we are within our trial and we are, reading the keyboard. We're waiting for the keyboard event. A keyboard event happens, okay, and we get the key. We check the button. It could be, you know, that they pressed A or L and we're fine, and we log, you know, the corresponding response. But if they press something wrong, you know, the program is still going to keep on going forward. So we're going to end up with a trial in which they didn't press A, they didn't press L, but we're just going to end up not recording anything for that trial in terms of the response. So what we have to make sure is that we're constraining the response to be either A or L, and we keep on waiting for a keyboard press. We keep on recording keyboard presses until either an A or an L has been produced. So we need to do this. We need to find some way to keep on checking the keyboard until a valid response has been produced. So this requires a little bit more of writing. So for the moment, I'm just going to write over here that this is about. So this is get key that was pressed. This is going to be, let's say, execute code according to key pressed. Okay, key that was pressed. Okay, so we might do something in case 65 was pressed, which it was A. So obviously we're doing something, you know, completely pointless. We're just writing on the screen that it was A. But you know, we wouldn't be doing something so different actually if we were logging the data. We would practically log something that is a bit more meaningful than just 65, like, you know, we're going to be logging that this is too short, the stimulus appeared too short. Here that the stimulus appeared too long. So what we're going to use here in order to, however, keep on reading is a loop. Now we saw loops when we talked about our flow, and we talked about for loops. I mentioned at the time that there's another type of loop that is a while loop. Now a while loop works in a similar way in the sense that you encapsulate some code within the loop, within the, in that case, the while loop, and it keeps on looping. The difference is that a for loop loops according to a counter. So you have a variable that has some range of values from 1 to 3, and you're going to be looping whatever's inside for as many times as this counter, you know, according to the range of this counter. So in this case, you know, you would be repeating this from 1 to 3, so for 3 times. A while loop works in a slightly different way. You keep on repeating whatever's inside until some condition is true. So it's more generic. You can make a while loop work exactly like a for loop if you just write a few lines of code to create your own counter. But in reality, what you can is just you can evaluate any statement, and you would plug it up here. So for example, I'm going to write this just in plain English, so just so we understand. So while some condition is true, do this. And so basically, the way this would work is, while this is true, whatever it can be, while some number is smaller than 100, just do this. Or for example, it could be, you know, while I haven't pressed a valid key, you know, that's kind of the logic that we would be using. Keep on reading the keyboard, okay? When finally your key is a valid key, you exit. So that's kind of like what we're going to do. So I'm going to write over here that we're going to be recording, well, let's say reading keyboard events until a valid key, in parentheses I mean either 65 or, what is it, 76, was pressed. Okay, so we need a statement up here, which will be something of the type, while a valid key was not pressed. So as long as a valid key isn't pressed, keep on reading. That's basically what we're going to be doing. So let's create a variable. So I'm going to start typing a variable in here. Something like valid, let's call it valid key pressed, or something like that. So I wrote it, but first we have to set it to something. So I'm going to set it to, I'm going to default it to a valid key was pressed is equal to 0. So basically, what we're saying is that we're taking a variable, we're going to call it valid key pressed, and we're setting it to 0. And by 0 I mean false. Okay? So I'm just going to even write by 0. I mean false. Okay, I'm kind of thinking it that way. So I'm setting this initially to false because if I haven't pressed anything yet, I haven't pressed a valid key press. I haven't pressed a valid key. Okay? So the statement I'm going to ask up here is, while valid key pressed is equal to 0. Now remember, this is a statement I'm asking where I want a true-false answer to. So you use the double equal sign, which is the same thing we did up here. Okay, so I'm saying, while valid key pressed, which is currently 0, is equal to 0, keep on doing whatever is in here. So the idea would be kind of, in here at some point I'm going to be reading for the keyboard, I'm going to be checking what's happening with the keyboard. And every time I'm going to be determining if a valid key was pressed. If it's not pressed, just keep on reading the keyboard. Keep on reading the keyboard. When finally a valid keyboard is pressed, I'm going to change the value of this variable. So when this statement is evaluated, I'm finally going to be able to exit this loop. This is all a little bit, it might be a little bit confusing, but it's going to be more clear when I start writing this in. So the first thing I need to do in here is I need to read the keyboard. So let's read the keyboard. Okay. So how do we read the keyboard? We do it like this. Okay, so we're waiting for a keyboard. So we're at keyboard wait. We're waiting for a response. Okay. The second thing we need to do is get the key that was pressed. We already have that, so I'm just going to type it. Just copy this in here. I'm going to indent this. Okay. And okay, then I'm going to run some statement. An if statement, because I need to account for when a correct key was pressed or it wasn't pressed, and I know that I can do that with an if statement. So I could have, for example, that I could just copy this. I'm just going to copy all this here. I'm going to indent this by just selecting and pressing Control I. I'm going to write something like evaluate key pressed. Okay. If key is equal to 65, okay, we could display something over here. If key is equal to, otherwise, if key is equal to 76, display something else, display that it was the L. Or else, if it's neither of those two, just display, that you press something else. That's fine. That's still going to work. But remember that at the end of the day, we want to be able to exit this loop sooner or later. Now, what controls whether we're inside this loop or not is the statement here. So it's going to remain. We're going to remain stuck in this loop until this statement is true. The statement is that valid key pressed is equal to 0. What I have to do is in order to exit this, I'm going to need, this value is going to have to change sooner or later. Now, I'm going to let it change only when a valid key was pressed. What are my valid keys? 65 and 76. So if you press 65, valid key pressed is going to be 1. It's going to become 1. If I press 76, valid key press is going to be set to 1. Okay? If you press anything else, nothing's going to happen to valid key press because that's not a valid key if it's not A or L. All right? So what's happening? So let's just try to go through this and see if we can understand what's going on. So before entering this loop, I am creating a variable that's called valid key pressed. I'm setting it to 0. Okay? Why am I setting it to 0? Because if I haven't pressed any key yet, I clearly haven't pressed a valid key. right? So let's just set it, let's just default it to 0. Let's start it off with 0. Okay, here starts my while loop. So my program enters at line 26 a while loop. Now the while loop, the condition that's required for me, MATLAB, to remain within this while loop is that this statement here is true, meaning that valid key pressed is equal to 0. When I reach this point for the first time, remember that I set valid key pressed to 0. I'm asking the question, is valid key pressed equal to 0? Yes, it is, because valid key pressed is 0. So it is equal to 0. This is true. Okay, so then our program progresses, and we reach line 29, in which we wait for a keyboard event. So the program is just going to remain here, is going to hang here until a keyboard button is pressed. When that happens, the program checks for what button was pressed, what key was pressed, and it does that by inspecting the vector keys, which is the one that we have up here, looking for wherever one appears in here, and it's going to tell me where the one happened, okay? At what location it happened, and that's identifying what key was pressed. And then we use an if-then statement to basically run, some different logic based on what key was pressed. So, for example, if key 65 was pressed, so if this is true, if key is equal to 65, then we change valid key pressed to 1, because 65 we established that is a valid key. And we also display it on the screen just so we know what happened. Otherwise, if key happened to be 76, which corresponds to the L key, also in this case, valid key pressed is updated to 1. And we display also on the screen what key was pressed. Otherwise, if anything else was pressed, we just display this on the screen, but we don't change the value of valid key pressed because this is not a valid key, so it's going to keep on remaining 0. Okay, valid key pressed is still going to be 0. So then we reach this point here, and we loop. So the program comes back to line 26, in which it once again evaluates whether this is true or not. Valid key pressed is equal to 0. So if 65 or 76 were true, and the value was changed, this statement will no longer be true, and we will exit the loop. If, however, it happens to be that we press neither 65 nor 76, but for example spacebar, this statement is still going to be true because valid key pressed is still 0, and we're going to keep on repeating. So we're once again going to wait for key press, we're going to figure out what the key was pressed, and we're going to determine which one of these 3 conditions it happens to be. Okay, so finally, let's just try running this and seeing what it looks like. So since this bit here and this bit here, there's a repetition, I'm just for the moment going to comment this out, just so we immediately get to this bit here, which is the one that we're really interested in. So in order to comment this, you remember it's this symbol here. I could write, obviously I could just write, this on top of every line, but I don't need to do that. There's a simpler way. I just select and press Control R. Okay, and all these things are commented, so they're not going to be running. So I'm going to press Run. Okay, so I'm going to go now to my command window. I know that MATLAB is waiting for me to do something because I have to press a keyboard button. So I'm going to press the wrong button because I know that if I press A or L, I should exit immediately. So I'm going to start pressing something wrong. I'm going to press space. You pressed something else. Okay. I'm going to press P. You press something else. Now I'm going to press A. You press key A. Okay. If I had pressed L, let's try that. Technically, I should also exit immediately. Yeah, you press the key L. So if I press something else, it clearly remained in the loop because it repeated the same answer over and over and over again. Now the reason why it gave me all these outputs, it repeated all these outputs over and over again, is because when I pressed A or L, I exited this loop immediately. Okay, so as soon as I got back to here, this proved to be false because I changed the value of this, so I exited the loop. When it was when I was instead in this condition here, so basically I pressed spacebar or whatever, I didn't change the value of key pressed. So I came back here, But I still didn't release this button. I was still holding down the keyboard button because obviously MATLAB will run this at whatever speed it can, and in my, on a modern computer, this is gonna by far outpace, my ability, the speed with which I let go of the keyboard. So anyway, we covered, the basic things here for reading the keyboard and getting the keys that were actually pressed. We also got the time at which they were pressed. We don't really need to use that right now, but eventually it might be useful if we want reaction times or something like that. We were able to actually identify what key was pressed, what number corresponding to the identifier of that key was pressed, but by inspecting a vector over here and finding where this vector was 1. And then we wrote some code which permitted us to keep on reading the keyboard until we have produced either a key press of button A or of button L. Okay? If we haven't pressed either of those two buttons, we press something else, we keep on repeating because we want to make sure in the trial that the participant either presses A or L, and if he hasn't pressed either of the two, we still keep on recording, we still keep on reading the keyboard events until the correct button is pressed, and only then we advance to the next trial. Okay, so that pretty much covers this part, and in the next one we're actually going to be looking at how to log results, so basically how to store the information that is pertinent to the trial. So let's close this here and see you in a bit.